Hello, everyone, and welcome to our presentation tonight. We first want to start. Oh, sorry. Hello, everybody. Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you tonight to our presentation. Let me start over. Hello, I want to welcome you to our presentation tonight. I'm going to start off with a word of prayer, and then we're going to jump right into things. All right, so everybody bow your head and close your eyes. Dear Jesus, thank you for bringing us all here tonight to this presentation. Let us learn something new or refresh on new things and just take in what we're going to hear tonight. Please keep us healthy throughout these times. You know what's going on in the world. Please bless the people that are in Texas right now. You know what they're going through, and just keep everybody safe and bless us. In Jesus' name, amen. The next person you'll be hearing from is our moderator for tonight, Miss Batiste.
Thank you so much, Casey. And again, welcome and happy Black History Month. We close out this significant time bringing remembrance and tribute to African American history, its trials, breakthroughs, and legends. We would be remiss if we did not express our eternal gratitude for those who have made monumental contributions to the African American community. I am sure that when we think about Black history giants, we all have our favorites. I can honestly say that the two gentlemen doctors that I'm going to introduce to you tonight are among my favorites. Why? Because these doctors have not backed down from the truth that the role of racism as a unique form of stress and the weaponization of food is a key contributor to the creation of health disparities in the African American communities, irrespective of income. These doctors are on their own personal journeys toward better health and aren't afraid to share that eating a whole food, plant-based diet in urban communities is possible and is the key to eliminating health disparities. These two doctors are using their degrees in cardiology, family practice, as well as a doctorate in public health, not to line their pockets, but to enrich the lives of all who will listen and are seeking a better way to gain control of their current and future life. The doctors that I am referring to are Dr. Columbus Batiste and Dr. Eric Walsh. Tonight, they will be your guide through the information that will justify why the investment in your health pays off daily. If you don't believe me, just listen. Dr. Walsh and Dr. Batiste, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Danette.
It's good to be back. And welcome to those who joined us last time, those who are new with us again. It's a pleasure to present to you the second part 2 for slave food. Dr. Walsh, how are you?
Doing good. We've been busy this month, but
yes.
Really a blessing to be able to be used by the Lord on these issues, and enjoy doing this with you. And I'm looking forward to tonight. I love the people of Kansas Avenue, of course. So blessings to all of you, and let's just have a good time together tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to encourage those of you who may either have forgotten some of the message that we gave in part 1, or for those of you who are joining for the first time, I want to encourage you to go to YouTube and the Slave Food Project and take a listen to our prior presentations to fill yourself in. But just in brief summary, for those who may have just their memory is failing you, we spoke really about the role of stress in its determination of disease. We spoke really about a unique stressor that people of African descent face in racial discrimination. We spoke really about this journey of how individuals will turn during moments of stress to food. That nutrition that stresses equals dessert spell backwards, and how people will transition towards food in order to medicate themselves, in order to decompress and decrease the depression that's there. We spoke about how this journey that people say that this is their culture of who they are, this idea of soul food, this idea of my environment, of what my mother ate, my grandmother, my grandfather. But we pointed to the fact that the history is rich. It actually extends back to Africa, and that how food became weaponized, and this transition through the Middle Passage, and really this ultimate creation that developed during the Civil Rights era of these food deserts and food swamps that some would call food apartheid, and how the role of the government they play. So very interesting things. So we want to make sure that you tap into that and listen to it. And right now we're in part two. In part two, we're really highlighting this issue of slave food, the manipulation of nutrition for profit and for power. And there's several good things that authors have written, and we want to share with you. And Dr. Walsh is excellent as it relates to describing some of this.
So in a lot of my recent talks, I've been focusing on the impact of television and even music on how the brain works and how we behave. When you watch television, you drop from the theta waves down to like alpha waves. Theta waves is where you're most alert, where your reasoning skills are the best. When you watch television, you drop to the alpha waves, almost like being in a state of hypnosis. I say all of that to tell you that there's a reason the statistics I'm about to give you exist. So the food and beverage industry spends about $2 billion a year marketing to children. If you can hook a child on a product, you can hook them for life. Or Coca-Cola or Pepsi, they'll stick to one of them for the rest of their life most of the time. So the fast food industry spends more than $5 million every day marketing unhealthy foods to children. Nearly all of those foods are unhealthy, really. They are high in fat, sugar, and salt, and low in fiber. So one study found that when children were exposed to television content with food advertising, they consumed 45% more food than children exposed to content with non-food advertising. So it shows you right out the gate that just the commercials have power on you. Mm. Where it gets interesting as we look at, the kind of liberation nutrition, as we've been calling it, every day African-American children see twice as many calories advertised in fast food commercials as white children. And before I read this, and that is relevant because they do it through television program designed for our children. But Joe Furman, when he talks about the way, going back to last week's talk, the way that the food industry impacts us, he says this in the book Eat to Live. He says the modern food and drug industry has converted a significant portion of the world's people to a new religion, a massive cult of pleasure seekers who consume coffee, cigarettes, soft drinks, candy, chocolate, alcohol, processed food, fast foods, and concentrated dairy fat, cheese, in a self-indulgent orgy of destructive behavior. This man is not an Adventist, but he is wise enough to say this. When the inevitable results of such bad habits appear, pain, suffering, sickness, and disease, the addicted cult members drag themselves to physicians and demand drugs to alleviate their pain, mask their symptoms, and cure their diseases. These revelers become so drunk on their addictive behavior and the accompanying addictive thinking that they can no longer tell the difference between health and health care.
And that's powerful. That's a really powerful statement, because have you ever noticed, for those of out there listening, that you've taken medication so long, you're so used to the arthritis, you're so used to being short of breath, that you'll adjust your actions, and that you're used to being tired. And so these things, you quickly become adjusted to it, and you think that it's a norm, and it's not the norm. And so this is what studies have shown. And when we look at this, it predisposes you to early occurrence of disease. And there's even a study when we look at predictors of a Southern diet and Southern diet pattern. What we speak about a Southern diet pattern is you're speaking really about organ meats, you're speaking about fried, you're talking about sweetened beverages, you're talking about all these particulars there. And it says, among the possible predictors of adherence to a Southern diet pattern, Black participants, males, residents of the Southeast primarily, and current smokers were strongly adherent to the dietary pattern. Even after adjustment for other factors, markers of socioeconomic status were strong predictors in unadjusted models. But the adjustment for race, they were attenuated. And so what we know overall is we know that still there is an issue of predisposition if you're African American, that irrespective of your income, this study is still showing. This is one of the largest studies based out of Birmingham, Alabama, is where it's taken place and done a lot of predictive models in terms of disease outcomes. It shows that Black race was the most potent predictor of a higher adherence to a Southern dietary pattern in the Regards trial. Is that as this diet is strongly associated with the risk of several incident diseases. Further work basically is going to reveal really the impact of this overall. And so we have to be very much so aware. And so what are the components of this thing called the Southern diet? You know, I told you already, it's fried food, organ meats, but really if we hone it down, it's 3 components: salt, sugar, and fat. You know, one of the things when we look at salt, oftentimes we know that there's a this disparity significant as it relates to high blood pressure. And so many people think, well, okay, this is just who I am. And so we know people of African descent are more likely to have high blood pressure. I'm not sure how many of you know of someone who has high blood pressure, right? I know of lots of relatives and family that have high blood pressure. And you think, okay, this is just who I am. And maybe this is something genetic that's there, that we have such a higher burden of high blood pressure and a higher burden of suboptimally treated blood pressure. But studies have shown that as you begin to move from West Africa over to the United States, that's when you see this increase in blood pressure. In other words, inhabitants of West Africa have lower occurrences of high blood pressure than Caucasians here inside the United States. It tells us, once again, it references there is a unique factor that's there. It's not just this idea of a salt sensitivity gene. There's a unique factor in terms of stress, in terms of discrimination that plays a role in the predictive nature of high blood pressure inside of our communities. And so when we look specifically at salt, this idea of salt, it's not just something that is going to cause a little bit of swelling in the legs. It's not something that is going to make you a little bit thirstier. Salt actually impacts every aspect of your body independent of your blood pressure levels. That means that it can impact your brain, impacts your heart, impacts your vessels, your kidneys, your immune system is where this salt really impacts. And for those of you who are out there cooking, I always like to kind of tell you a little bit. It's 2,000 milligrams in 1 teaspoon of salt. So salt has substantial impacts and affects every single organ system, every single system of the body, from your immune system to your cardiovascular system to your renal system, your kidney functions. We look at sugar. Allow Dr. Walsh to take this area here.
Yeah, sugar is addictive in and of itself. The chemical makeup of sugar is actually not that different from alcohol. If you draw them out, like back in organic chemistry class, they don't look that different. You eat sugar and it creates pleasure, the sweet taste. You get a dopamine rush in your brain, dopamine is actually the same thing that is released in much higher quantities when people do things like cocaine. So you eat the sugar, and depending on how you take it in, my grandmother used to make us Kool-Aid, and Kool-Aid itself was basically just dyed sugar. And then she'd put a bag of sugar on her hip and poured a 5-pound bag of sugar and pour it until it was super sweet. It was like we were drinking liquid crack when you really think about how that thing tastes. But when you drink that Kool-Aid, your body begins to absorb the sugar before it even gets to your stomach. On the way down in your esophagus, your body begins to absorb the sugar. So you get that dopamine release I talked about. Your sugar levels shoot up through the sky. So in order for your body to manage that, it has to shoot out a whole bunch of insulin. When it shoots out all of that insulin, that causes your blood sugar to drop. And when your blood sugar drops quickly like that, all of a sudden you're hungry all over again. And you go through these massive spikes, which is why it's so important to eat foods that are fiber filled, so that the sugar is slowly released into your system in its natural form. The interesting thing about sugar is that in nature, Sugar is always bound to fiber, and the only time you don't find it in the form of fructose that's not bound to sugar, it's guarded by bees in the form of honey. So it's not to just be taken lightly.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting kind of tying in the earlier conversation about advertisement and sugar. My mind goes immediately to a commercial about a particular candy bar. And they like to go ahead and they talk about someone becoming a diva during that time because their blood sugar drops. And then all of a sudden they give them this particular candy bar and their blood sugar rises, but they don't show the aftermath. That once again, that blood sugar is going to drop from what you just described. And so that's a powerful statement. And there's actually a lot of studies to validate and back it up and showing that rats and mice, they'll tend to go outside of the crevices in the hidden spaces to go out to get sugar as opposed to cocaine. And that when you add the sugar to fat that we'll speak about next, it increases this insatiable amount of eating that's uncontrollable, that when you add in this perfect mixture of sugar and fat, that's what lends to this hyperpalatable and overeating state that we oftentimes encounter. And it's not just that. We see that sugar actually can increase your risk of heart disease. In a study that was published several years ago, we say that there's as much as 4 times an increased risk of heart disease from added sugar. So I want the folks out there to remember 4 grams equals 1 teaspoon. You know, so that's one of the big ways, the big methods that the food industry has sought out to confuse us, is that you no longer know specifically in terms of what the ingredients are. It lists everything in grams, and I don't know, I'm not a druggist. So you have to do the math. 4 grams equals 1 teaspoon. So if it says 20 grams, that means you're having 5 teaspoons of sugar per serving of whatever is listed there. So make sure you take a look at those things. And then turn to fat is the other area.
And fat and sugar kind of are similar in that they used to think that fat didn't impact taste, but I do now know that there are taste buds who actually do respond to fat. And of course, the other thing with fat, of course, is texture. You can look here and see that the added fats and oils availability increased almost 30 pounds between 1970 and 2000. Animal fat actually stayed the same. What shot up really is processed fats from oils, from plant oils, which a lot of people think are healthy, but as we're going to talk about, it really isn't that healthy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we look at 40 olives equals 1 tablespoon of olive oil, 14 ears of corn, 1 tablespoon of corn oil.
And here, this slide is an interesting one, and I'll just sum it up. Basically shows that Black people eat more meat than everybody else, except I think beef is the only exception where we don't eat the most amount of beef, but we clearly eat the most chicken, the most pork, even the most turkey and the most fish. And as we talk about meat and fat and the blood of the meat, the proteins and some of the toxins, you find that this is actually a horrible statistic for the health of Black America. So as you can see, not all fat is the same, just like all carbohydrates aren't the same. Not all fats are the same. So trans fats and saturated fats tend to increase mortality, but monounsaturated fats and polyunsaturated fats seem to decrease mortality. So they're a bit protective. Trans fats are probably the worst ones. And basically, trans fats have been banned in most forms in the United States. The one last place you can get trans fats is animal products. When you eat meat and chicken and all those things is where you get it. And you also get a lot of saturated fat in those products as well. When you look at it this way, when you age adjust the death rate per 100,000 and you look at the total dietary fat intake, you can see that the higher your fat intake, the higher the age-adjusted death rate. And I think this actually had to do with women's cancer. We might have cut off the piece there. But you can see the United States is way up at the top. In other countries where meat is expensive or not eating nearly much as we do, those rates are much lower. And one of the fascinating things is that when you look at meat, processed meats are group 1 carcinogen like cigarettes. And even group 2A, you have I think DDT, one of the pesticides is in group 2A. So you probably wouldn't expose yourself intentionally to DDT, and you definitely should know, you should know better than to smoke cigarettes. But when we eat these processed meats, hot dogs and salami and bacon, and America, when we put bacon on like everything,
Yes.
people put bacon on ice cream. I couldn't even understand the concept. But all of these things. So this is group 1 carcinogens. When you ask yourself why the cancer rate is so high, this is a big part of it, I believe, because these foods are basically ubiquitous.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the one thing. When I'm talking to my patients, one of the things I ask them, I'll say, listen, would you go and stay at a hotel, no matter how many stars are on that hotel, if you knew it had asbestos in it? They look at me and they're like, nah, doc, I wouldn't stay there. I said, why? Because of the potential risk of cancer. So why would you periodically eat these food substances, knowing that it's a level of exposure and the risk of cancer? And so it's significant. We have to be aware, and that's part of the issue. And what we're trying to seek to deliver to folks is knowledge and information about the impact of the choices. Because when we eat these foods, we know we're increasing the risk of preventable diseases. We're increasing the risk of stroke. We're increasing the risk of heart disease, of diabetes, of colon cancer, prostate cancer, bladder cancer, colon cancer, Chadwick-Boseman died of. I don't know the etiology or cause for it. Prostate cancer, which seems to be rampant. We know it's a higher burden, and Dr. Walsh can speak to this, in the African-American community. Bladder cancer, we see too as well. Significant issues.
Yeah, prostate cancer. I don't know. I'm not sure if this is the one with the slide with on eggs, but one of the studies do show that dairy products, eggs, also specifically increases the risk of prostate cancer. So, as a Black man growing up, on Sunday, there was nothing better than going to my grandfather's house and having those fry us up some eggs. And what we now know is that those fried eggs, especially when you're eating them all week, they actually increase the risk of prostate cancer. Bladder cancer, there's a lot of things that can run into that, especially certain things that we drink. So some of the dyes and sodas and stuff may actually contribute to bladder cancer as well.
Absolutely. This slide is an interesting slide because it tells us really about something that's come into attention lately, which is called the gut microbiome. And so I'm not sure if any of you out there have realized that the gut microbiome is really, we have this symbiotic relationship with bacteria. And so not all bacteria, you grow up kind of thinking, oh, bacteria is bad. Well, there are some very devastating bacteria and viruses out there, but there's also some very useful bacteria that work synergistically with us to modify disease and to prevent other infections and things of that nature. And so here's the thing that we found that the foods we choose to eat can either feed our good bacteria, the good guys, or feed our bad bacteria. Our actions, our activity or inactivity can either stimulate our good bacteria or stimulate our bad bacteria. Our thought processes, our rest, having a restful state, all these things contribute. And so what we know is that when this occurs, especially with animal products, that it releases this carnitine, can release a process that leads to something called trimethylamine oxide that leads to atherosclerosis or hardening of the vessels that can potentiate stroke and diabetes and heart disease and kidney failure and death, is what more and more studies are starting to show us out of this. So it's beyond just saying fat. We'll see these Time articles saying fat's back and fat's not bad, and it's really just a sugar and process. And they're right. It's deeper than that. We're finding there's multiple layers to it. But the foods we eat, animal, dairy products, they can stimulate this. And this is another pathway that's been exposed as a precipitant towards the chains of disease.
Fish is one of the foods a lot of people turn to. And what we know, I mentioned toxins earlier, is that there is something called bioaccumulation. So as these heavy metals and toxins have been dumped into the ocean, and the tiniest fish eat a little piece of something and get a little bit of it, and the bigger fish eat the tiny fish, it accumulates and passes all the way up to us. And just mercury, one of the things, there's a lot of other things, but it can increase the risk of heart disease. So a lot of people talk about, you need a fish for omega-3s, but the fish get the omega-3s from the algae. The fish don't make the omega-3s. And so they're a better place to get omega-3s, like chia seed, flax seed, and some other seeds. You can actually get the omega-3s without this. And there's other, obviously sea-based ways that you can get it as well. The only thing I'd mention here is fish also are farmed. So when they're not from the ocean, they put them in giant tanks, very tightly packed to make the most money. And in order to keep them from dying, they got to dump antibiotics into the tank. When they dump the antibiotics into the tank, the fish eat them, and then you eat the antibiotics. This is one of the ways animal products across the board, not just fish, cows, chickens, they feed the animals these antibiotics. We eat the foods, we get the antibiotics, and it increases the amount of resistant strains of antibiotics that we all have to deal with.
Yes.
Resistant strains of bacteria we all have to deal with, I think, as antibiotics. So dairy is another one that's interesting. You know, we were told milk, it does the body good. But what we now know is that actually it increased the rates of childhood overweight and obesity. And the animal protein, specifically casein, and it is not good for you. Casein is a cancer promoter. So one of the reasons the cancer rates are so much higher in the West than in the East and in places like Africa is they just do not eat dairy products, drink cow's milk like we do. If girls drink lots of milk, or they actually is associated with earlier age of menarche, and that's when girls first start to have their periods, which means they're gonna have more of their life to be exposed to estrogen, which can increase the risk long-term of breast cancer and other problems. And they also have increase your exposure to something we call endocrine disrupting chemicals, which can wreak havoc based on the reproductive system and hormone system in women and in men, actually.
Yeah, and this slide is referencing the fact that many, especially those of African descent, have lactose intolerance. And so we know lactose intolerance is fairly prevalent in many communities, rather many racial groups out there, and the highest predominance inside of African Americans and Asian descent individuals too, as well, is what we're seeing there. And so, you know, people will still eat it, and they just, once again, I'm used to being bloated. I'm used to the gas. I'm used to the ill effects from having the heavy amounts of cheese, which is one of the hardest things to give up. You know, this idea of casomorphs and whether or not it slows your gut down as a derivative of an opioid, whether or not it's what keeps you attracted and coming back for more and more, are one of the concepts behind some of the cheese addiction or preferences for cheese too as well. This study is interesting because what it does is that it tells us really the fact that there is a substantially increased risk. When they do a large survey, 61,000 individuals, and tracking them, women, and 45,000, nearly 100,000 individuals over a period of time, they found the level of increased disease is significant for each glass of milk. For each glass of milk consumed, the risk of dying from all cause increased by 15%, risk of heart disease by 15%, and risk of cancer by 17% by a single choice to add this to your dietary intake. For women who consume 3+ glasses of milk per day, with less than one, compared to those with less than one, it increased their risk of dying by 93%. Significant, right? In men, the same thing. The risk of dying is there significantly.
We kind of talked about eggs already. I think I'll throw in there some of this data here. That one egg has the same amount of cholesterol as a Big Mac. One whole egg. That is mind blowing if you think about that for a second. Just one egg, and you make an omelet. You go on a cruise ship and you go to that omelet bar. They slap in 3-4 eggs into one omelet. And so what do eggs do? Well, they increase your cardiovascular risk by 19%. Increases the risk of colon cancer nearly 5 times. And so you're going to see this could be contributing factor to when you see some young, healthy men get colon cancer. When I started lifting weights, playing football, they told us to crack eggs and drink them straight. And I guess they got that from the movies or Rambo or Rocky. I'm not sure where they got it from, but I could never do it, of course. It's just too nasty. I had to cook my egg for it. But it increased the risk of colon cancer 5 times. Increased the risk of diabetes by 68%. Why? Because intramuscular fat blocks the insulin receptors and makes it so that you don't absorb sugar into your cell. And of course, lethal prostate cancer. This is something I mentioned earlier, by 81%. I didn't know if this slide was going to be up, so I wanted to make sure I got it in there. But in a group of people like Black men who have the highest rate of prostate cancer in the world, this is a food that you should immediately take off the table. Do not get your young men used to it, because this is a food you really don't want them to eat because of the risk we all as Black men have for prostate cancer.
Yeah. And, you know, we throw this slide in here because it's important for us to not to be too judgmental. And so there's many out there who say, hey, listen, docs, we've been vegetarian our whole lives and we eat food out of a can, we fry it up, we grill it, we do all this stuff, but it's all vegetarian food. And what these studies have shown is this study of a major cardiovascular journal told us that there are healthful and unhealthful foods. So, you know, foods of the earth are healthful. Foods of a can and are packaged and processed, rich in salt, sugar, and fat, are unhealthful foods. And so studies have shown that when you're eating these unhealthful plant-rich foods, you actually do worse. You actually do worse than people who are eating meat. And so it becomes important for us to look at really true quality of the foods, look at what we're eating for our health and focus on foods that are rich in fiber and nutrients and decay. That's something we were talking about earlier today. As we said, you know, a definition of food should be something that decays, something that degrades, not a food-like substance that can stay on the shelf and last a millennia. This study here was basically looking from the regard study showing really the increased amount risk of heart disease as you consume the Southern dietary pattern, which we spoke about before. That red line is reflection of that. That means the likelihood of survival and having an event is much higher. This study basically shows that you're coming to see people like me. If you're having more of this Southern style food, your risk of heart failure, which means that your heart doesn't pump efficiently. Either it's too weak or it's too thick and too stiff, what we call diastolic heart failure. And it increases your risk if you're eating this type of dietary pattern, which isn't just in the South. It's all across the United States is what we're seeing. This study here also is in reference. It tells us really about the role of sepsis and saying this, which is an infection, this inflammatory state. And Dr. Walsh, I don't know if you want to chime in with this one, especially as it relates to COVID and looking at obesity and the inflammatory state and the foods that we eat.
Well, yeah. So we, you know, last time we talked about stress and how stress actually increases inflammation by creating cortisol resistance. Well, we now know that some of these food patterns also create inflammation. And so the actual coronavirus enters through the ACE2 receptor. Don't need to really know all of that. What you do need to know is that it causes what we call a cytokine storm, basically a massive increase in inflammation in the lungs and the kidneys and in other places. That rapid uptick of inflammation is why COVID is deadly. So think about it. If you have high inflammation because of stress, then you have high inflammation because of diet, and then you get hit with a high inflammation virus like coronavirus, it's no wonder African Americans are disproportionately suffering from the disease and from death from the COVID scourge that we have going on in the world right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, and this slide basically is in referencing the increased risk and burden of kidney failure. You know, that's a significant, something that's rampant, associated with diabetes and high blood pressure, and is associated with increased mortality or death as it relates to this. And diets rich in nitrates, which we know are in the bacon and some of the other processes like that, but that we find that vegetables tend to be protective. So as we're eating these Southern style foods, they're harmful, and it's not surprising that vegetables and fruits are protective against this.
Mm-hmm.
This study here is looking similarly really at strokes, the impact of strokes, which is really just, that's a horrible morbidity, which means that it changes your life and changes the life of your family when you succumb to that sort of limitation that's there, and the increased risk that occurs with partaking of the Southern diet. Last, in terms of this series here, when we look at this, it's really speaking about our cognition. And one of the things that's most important to us are our memories, our interactions in our life, and the risk of Alzheimer's, which is now being referenced to some degree as a type 3 diabetes, meaning that it's still an ill effect and consequence of our lifestyle. And this intracellular fat, all of the other components, the lack of activity, they all play a role really in development there. So, you know, it's important. We have to have a change of heart. You know, what we're eating and this shelf life. I mean, I think we need to go ahead, and I hate to buy something from one of the fast food restaurants, but we need to show folks about how this food looks when it's just sitting on your shelf for days and months and years and doesn't change at all. We have to have a change of heart really in this, and this is important.
So this is a quote from Al Sharpton. He says, avoiding meat is the way to eat for anyone with a highly charged life. A vegetarian diet has a way of absorbing the stress and gives you greater endurance. And that's actually very well said. So when we talk all this talk about stress, and I don't know if we have the slides on telomeres in this one, but Dean Ornish actually was able to reverse the shortening of telomeres, which we've talked about before. And it's the same kind of principle around stress, in my opinion. If you have a lifestyle that reverses stress, it will naturally begin to reverse telomere shortening. So it's Al Sharpton actually said that very well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We do have to change our approach and our thought process with food. We have to stop using food as a crutch, food as a fake resource for the stresses of life, and start to use it for real, true resiliency in our approach. And this idea, we have to embrace food justice, the idea that healthy food is a human right. The belief that what is lacking is not food, but political will and fairly distribute food, regardless of the recipient's ability to pay. I felt like this is a very timely and important statement there, because it's important that everyone have this right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or I'd say the pursuit of health, right? And that entails the food environment that they live in too as well. One of the things that's brought me great pleasure when I stumbled upon this is from this unique historically Black college and university, the sole one that is vegetarian based, and we all may be familiar. We are alumnus of this Oakwood University, and what they're doing is they're bringing farmers markets to the people, and they're actually doing this and going in twice a week was their thought process, and really doing something unique in order to change the dynamics that are there, and that's important. Mm-hmm. Did you get a chance to see that one, Eric?
I haven't seen that. That's actually very powerful, and this is and I hope Oakwood I know Oakwood will do well with this. I know Dr. Pollard. I'm sure they'll do very well with this. And I hope it's something that is modeled by churches or Black conferences across the country, so that we start doing this. This would really up our visibility in the community, and actually, going in and telling people to stop eating meat is a lot of what we've done as our health message for a long time. Imagine how much more powerful it is to go in and be able to say, eat this. Yes. Instead of meat, giving them the option, and then even being able to show them how to prepare healthy vegetable dishes, I think would be very powerful for a lot of our communities.
Absolutely. Because it's about extending the health span. This is a reference of the telomeres, and we'll talk about that shortly. But really, it's those ends of your DNA, like the ends of your shoelaces. And as they become shortened, those plastic caps, that marks really the end of your shoelace, the end of your DNA, and predicts death. And that's one of the key things. And Eric, I know you know a lot and done a lot of work in public health arena, and what we know and what studies have shown, and you can speak to it a bit more, is this relationship between stress and shortened telomeres, this relationship, and the fact that this can be rejuvenated through our lifestyle, through our interactions and social interactions.
And that's actually very important, because if this is how you age, or it's a marker of aging, and you can reverse it, you can literally, age backwards. And I think that's something that a lot of us don't realize, is that we're not destined to grow old and sick. You might have to grow old, but you don't have to grow old and sick. One of my favorite Bible stories is actually the death of Moses. And the Bible says that when Moses climbed Mount Nebo, the Bible says his eyes were not dimmed and his strength had not abated. Moses was just as strong at 120 years old as he was at 40 years old. And I think that has everything to do with the fact that he followed God's instructions to the letter. In terms of diet and exercise, that's all. Man, he walked around in a big circle for 40 years. So, he was a pretty strong dude by the time he got to the top of Mount Nebo.
He was walking on that natural treadmill track, huh?
Walking around the desert
in circles. But when we do this, I mean, the thing is that when these studies of these simple, basic lifestyles, I mean, we're always looking for the glorious type of techniques, the new technology, and everything of that sort. But when you look at the basics, and what Dean Ornish did was he brought folks back to the basics. He said, let's eat healthfully. Let's work on our stress. Let's give up the smoking, give up the caffeine, the sugar sweetened beverages. Let's get out and exercise. And what he found is individuals who did that were able to decrease their prostate specific antigen levels significantly. But not just that. What he did was he actually found that the blood serum from people who made these changes were more active in destroying the cancer cells. I mean, that's powerful right there. That's extremely powerful. If we have the chance that through our actions, we can actually fight this, because studies have shown we're actually constantly in a battle against a very similar to the spiritual battle. We're in a battle against illness versus wellness on a daily basis. We just don't know what's going on beneath the surface. We're not in tune with it. And so we're fighting cancer and cancerous cells on a regular basis. And so we're either arming our body to fight efficiently, or we're providing our body throwing up the white flag and saying, have at us. And so it's time we have to change. And he did the same thing with the lifestyle heart trial. We did a group of cast-offs, a group of people where docs like myself said, you know what, we can't do anything for you. No stents, no surgery. And he put them through the same process of changing their diet, getting them exercise, decreasing their stress. And what he found was that within 3 weeks, the symptoms of angina went away. Within 3 weeks, he increased their functional activity, right? Within several weeks, he was able to increase all of these measures, decreasing their cholesterol, improving the blood flow to the heart. That's powerful. That's powerful that our lifestyle can actually predict our outcome. That's there. And this is now, Eric, you've worked heavily with Adventist Health Studies. I'm gonna let you take these next series of slides here.
Yeah, I mean, basically, this shows that it's a dose, kind of like a dose-dependent response that you get from diet. So if you're non-vegetarian, that's the orange bars. If you are completely whole food and plant-based, I don't really like the word vegan, you can see how weight drops as you start giving up stuff. So orange, you eat anything. You go partly vegetarian in the kind of gold one there, you do better. You go pesco vegetarian, it actually jumps up, probably because you eat so much fish that it negates some of the benefits of the previous one. But then if you go lacto ovo, where you're still eating cheese and eggs, it drops again. And then of course, once you drop all the way down to whole food and plant-based, the weight drops the most. That'll make it easier for me to go through the other ones, because you'll see the same pattern here when you look at it. To type 2 diabetes, as you go through that same gradation, look how frequency of type 2 diabetes just comes right down. Same thing with hypertension. You follow it, except you notice when they're semi-vegetarian, it pops back up a little bit. That may be because in Adventist Health Study, they're eating a lot of vegetarian meat products that have a lot of salt, which may have actually impacted the blood pressure there.
Absolutely.
And then here's high cholesterol. I mean, straightforward. And then the next one. Oh, this was a great one. Columbus will take this one and talk about the exchange between South Africa and America.
Yeah, I mean, this is a powerful study. And so what this does is a reflection of that thing called the microbiome I told you folks about earlier, about this symbiotic state with bacteria. And so what they did, the group of researchers, they said, okay, you know what, we're going to take a group of Africans from South Africa that were Black Africans, and we're going to exchange their dietary pattern, which was rich in fiber, 95% fiber rich, root vegetables and various things of that sort. And we're going to swap them with Black African Americans out of Pittsburgh with their standard American diet, high in fat, salt, and sugar. And what they found was that within 2 weeks, they were able to show and demonstrate that the markers for colon cancer turned on and turned off based on the switch away or towards the standard American diet. That this dietary pattern is so harmful in inciting disease inside of our body, inflaming disease in our body, that it's able to turn on in such a short period of time, but through your actions, you can turn it off. And so huge power that's there. Likewise, and this is a powerful study as well, you know, in this reflection, really looking at the power of just switching from eating some of the animal-rich proteins to a plant-rich source, that you're able to decrease your burden of disease, that you're able to extend your life. And what studies are shown across the board, this improvement that's there. So it's powerful really in our choices.
In Victorville, some of you may remember this actually, Maranatha, I forget the whole name of the thing, Maranatha Prison Ministries or Prison Industry, an Adventist-owned prison was built, and they had 2 ways that you could go through it. The standard California Department of Corrections way, or this kind of whole food, plant-based, more spiritual way. And interestingly enough, they thought no one would choose that whole food, plant-based side, but many of the inmates did. And what they found is that those inmates who chose that side, when they went out into the yard, there was no race-based fighting. They were better in their rehabilitation programs. What was most striking, of course, is that side, there was only a 2% recidivism rate. In other words, 2%. Only 2% of the people who were let out actually ever came back into prison system at all. Whereas on the other side, it's like 90%. Fascinating thing is when you've proved that the whole food plant-based diet in a more holistic spiritual program works so well, the prison actually was shut down by the state of California over phone bills, and probably because they were thinking, listen, don't take away our ability to make money.
That's powerful. I mean, that is a powerful study right there. Kind of looking at, once again, the principles that we're going to talk about in Plantscription really applied to prisoners can really change the outcome. And there's even, I read a story about that where one individual went on from that program, living in a fabulous area, a wonderful job, a wonderful business rather, after really coming out of this program. It's powerful.
Yeah. So, go ahead, Combs.
No, yeah. So with Plantscription, one of the things, and we're going to tag team on this because one of the key things, what is a prescription? How do you do it? What is liberation nutrition? Well, liberation nutrition is really starting outside the kitchen, right? It's starting outside the kitchen. And so Eric's going to walk you through starting outside the kitchen. Then I'm going to get you once you jump inside the kitchen here.
Yeah, so outside the kitchen, what we talk about, of course, is things like getting enough sleep. The studies are overwhelming. If you sleep deprived, it correlates with an inability to control the appetite the next day, and you consume more calories. I mentioned this earlier. How much television do you watch? Television watching actually kind of dumbs you down, and you tend to mindlessly eat if you eat while watching television. And even if you're not watching television, the influence of the advertisement and even the way that people eat and live on the TV shows can negatively impact you. Otherwise than that, sunshine, making sure you get enough vitamin D, a lot that can be said about that. Of course, exercise and release of endorphins, which help to lower stress as well. And of course, one of the most important things we like to talk about is making sure that you are spending time in God. If you want to do real behavior change, the old hymn says, turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. Spend more time getting to know Jesus through prayer and Bible study before you even make the move to the kitchen.
Yes. Powerful. One other thing that we don't have on there, but it's extremely important, is really looking at setting the time window as you enter into this phase that you're going to eat, and recognizing the fact that the body needs time to rest. And that there is a level that Eric always mentions and has brought to light, which is extremely important, really, is there's a scriptural and spiritual connotation to time restricted eating, or this idea of intermittent fasting, in terms of even how God really went about delivering food to people, delivering manna, delivering food by ravens and so forth.
To Elijah, yeah, it was twice a day, both times, two times a day.
So powerful. But when we start off in this idea of Plantscription, one of the things is that we want you to focus on what you are eating for your health. I'll tell you that's one of the big travesties, is that we're oftentimes so negative. And many times, if I can speak honestly with you as Christians, we focus on what we don't do. I don't do this. I don't do that. I don't go there. I don't go there. What do you do? Right? And so we have to really kind of change our focus. And so when we're looking really at our health, what are you doing for your health? Let's turn it positive. And so one of the things we want you to do is we want you to start off really to try and focus on, say, okay, listen, we are going to focus on getting in our beans, our lentils. About 1 cup a day is what we're going to shoot for. And so you may say, you know what, Doc, I can't really do that. I can do a half a cup. That's okay. Be specific. What type of bean? How much can you eat? Is it lending itself towards your goal? The answer is yes. It's a resistant carbohydrate. It can help lower your blood sugar. It can help give you the protein that on everyone's mind, but protein with fiber. It's hugely important. What's the second thing we want you to do? We want you also to get your berries. So right now I just went out and, before I had my blueberries and blackberries, and I love a little twist, and I throw pomegranates in it, and it gives it a nice sweet flavor. rich in antioxidants. The key is, imagine when you cut that apple, cut the banana, which are great fruit, they turn brown. When you have your berries, they don't turn brown. They're rich in antioxidants, which help stand in the gap to prevent you from developing disease through oxidative stress. Hugely important. This should be number one, or at least number two, which is the green leafy vegetables. There's so much power. There's so much importance really when it comes to green leafy vegetables. You have your dietary nitrates that can help. We know that it's helpful to lower the blood pressure. We know it's helpful for reducing cancer. You cannot get enough of these things called green leafy vegetables. That's important to chew them. It's important to lightly blanch. Don't cook them till you're kind of trying to drink the pot lick afterwards. Cook them where there's still a little bit of crunch left inside of it. That's where it's important. Getting your whole grains and having, not just your carbohydrates are not bad. Carbohydrates are not the enemy. It's the processed refined foods, food-like substances that melt in your mouth, not in your hands. That's what's a problem. The stuff that Dr. Walsh talks about, I don't know if you want to chime in with this, called vanishing calories. That form that just dissipates there quickly.
Yeah, when you eat like hot Cheetos, you get that nice crunch. Your brain says, wow, we're about to get some celery, apples or something. And then it turns the powder in your mouth and it melts. Yes. Literally melts. You don't even have to keep chewing it really. And so your brain is fooled and thinking food is coming. It doesn't. So your brain says, okay, I need more, I need more, and need more. And so you can eat a whole bag of those crunches, a big bag of those crunches, but you couldn't eat the same size bag of apple slices that crunch, or celery sticks or carrot sticks that crunch, because the fiber and the chewing would wear you out.
Yes, yes. And so lastly, we'll say is we want you to get like about 3 tablespoons of raw nuts and or seeds. So I'll tell you, not honey roasted, not oil fried, pan fried, not toasted with cinnamon and brown sugar, but just straight raw nuts.
And not a lot of salt, because they put a ton of salt on some of those nuts.
Yes, yes, yes. And that's important. So this PLANTSCRIPTION plan, listen, it's not a one size that fits all, right? We want to meet you where you're at. So you may say, hey, doc, I hear you. I'm not ready to go all the way there. Okay, well, that's where the entry spot is. All right, you're still not convinced quite yet. At least we want you not to eat the red meat, because we told you it's a carcinogen. We know it's about the worst of the worst as it pertains to disease burden. So you may start off with chicken, fish, and dairy still, but you're focusing on getting in those foods of fruits and vegetables and whole grains and beans. As you begin to get your confidence and you're making success, you're then going to move to beginner phase, where you begin to eliminate these other aspects of chicken, fish on top of the red meat, right? And you may still be struggling with your dairy in that phase. The next phase is that you're going to eliminate dairy. That's really as you're going to move down this process of becoming the best version of you, the most clear version, have clarity of thought and process that's there. The next level is that you're saying, okay, I am going to go ahead and move towards no dairy, no meats, and actually I'm going to put down the canned meats that I've been eating since I was a child. I'm going to put down the veggie meats. I'm going to put down the Worthington or whatever the companies are for that moment, because I want to move towards foods that are going to completely enrich me, right? That's really the goal of this PLANTSCRIPTION plan, is meeting people. And there's some of you who are already at the level of advance, and you're saying, doctors, why are you kind of giving them an option of eating foods? Because we're all on this journey at different phases, right? We're all seeking a certain goal in mind, and we may be at different points. And our job is to extend love and gratitude and rather empathy to other people, as we're helping to carry them along this journey towards the best health that God has in store for them. So this PLANTSCRIPTION plan is that you can listen. The goal is to advance. Don't stop just at one phase. Keep moving and keep your sights in line. The goal is to as well, is that we want you to make sure that you're going to choose the right stage for you before you jump in. Too often coaching folks, they say, I'm going to go all in hard, doc. I'm going to give up everything. And they fall right back down. And that's okay, right? It's okay as long as you get back up again and get back at it. And so we want you to choose the amount of time that you're going to spend in each stage. And it's okay to go back and forth in each stage, but you're making sure you emphasize those health promoting foods. And once again, choose that eating window. It's extremely important. So we're here for you. We want to provide you with the resources, and we're actually in the process of really writing not only a book, but also really the PLANTSCRIPTION plan itself that can help guide you through this process. And because as a community, if we replace, when I is replaced with we, even illness becomes wellness, right? It takes a community. That this community does what? This community builds resiliency. This community actually now is a force to be reckoned with in terms of our health, and creating Black blue zones is our goal. Mr. Ned, I see you back up. We want to make sure that folks know that you can follow us at slavefood.org. What's not on there is, I want everyone who's listening right now, I want you to go in and I want you to like Slave Food Project on YouTube. Like Slave Food Project on YouTube.
We actually need you to subscribe to it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Subscribe to at Slave Food Project at YouTube. We're trying to do a big push to get our numbers up.
And definitely share that with people that you know who you love. Yes, send it to everybody.
All right, so we've got some questions, and if you are still watching and you do have some questions, please put that in the chat window and we will try to get to your questions as well. One of the statements was, for years they heard about dairy products being beneficial for bone health. Can you address that?
Yeah, that was an unfortunate misconception told to the American people on the level of the lies that the tobacco industry sold us. Because what happens when you drink cow's milk, it actually strips your body of calcium. Osteoporosis is non-existent basically in countries where they don't drink dairy milk. The better way to get calcium is actually to get it through green leafy vegetables. Cow's milk messes up your calcium phosphorus ratio, and so your body finds that it needs to pull the calcium from your bones. So it is actually a misconception. It is not true, and there are much better, healthier ways to get your calcium.
Fantastic. Can you guys speak more to intermittent fasting? You guys referenced, like in the Bible, they were eating twice a day. Is there a specific time? Are you guys saying breakfast, lunch, dinner, breakfast, dinner? Like, what would you say is your recommendation for intermittent fasting?
I'll answer this quick and let Columbus jump in after. But what the study shows is that you want to have at least 5 hours between your meals. Mm-hmm. That gives you need to give your body a chance to actually go into a state of catabolism, where it's actually able to break down, where your insulin levels are able to stay low, so you don't get insulin resistant, and you don't get leptin resistant, which is the hormone your fat cells release to tell you you're full. So if you're always eating, you never get those things to go down. So you develop resistance, and obviously insulin resistance is the precursor to diabetes. Leptin resistance is the precursor to obesity, or one of the ways that happens. So intermittent fasting is basically saying, look, overnight I'm gonna give my body at least 10 hours. We would say probably if you can stop eating by 7 and not eat again until at least 6, right? So that gives you,
AM, right?
AM. Well, you can't eat 7 p.m. and then eat 6 p.m. But AM, so that you get like 11 hours, ideally like 12 hours. So if you can eat earlier, and then 5 hours in between the meals during the day. And the best time to exercise is after you've had at least 5 hours of fasting. So when you start looking at it, it helps you pick when you can work out, and it also picks the times of the day you should eat. So if you eat at 7 in the morning, and you eat again at 3 in the afternoon, those are the 2 meals all you need all day. Now, everybody can't do that. So you can't have a third meal, but that just means they still should be spaced by 5 hours. The third meal should be the lightest meal of the day if you're going to do a third.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So next question, how important is it to get protein in your diet? Dr. Pettis, we'll give that one to you.
Yeah, so, I'll tell you, in all my years of practice, I've never seen one protein deficient patient at all. So that is a fallacy. That's an advertisement ploy in terms of protein. And that idea of protein really was debunked many, many years ago by the person and the authority who put it out there. But that part was somehow lost in the literature. And so one of the things that we know is that you are going to get adequate amounts of protein from your vegetables. You're going to get it from your legumes. So I mean your beans, a great source of protein. And so is either your lentils, your beans, your peas, green peas are excellent sources. Even your grains have excellent source of protein. And so as you mix these things, you're getting more than enough protein inside your system to sustain you. Lastly, I'll tell you is that here's the added value by focusing on these plant-rich sources. You get the fiber, like is what I mentioned. The majority of Americans are actually fiber deficient. That is what leads to many ailments out there. It's fiber deficiency.
Okay. Now, Eric, you mentioned you referenced Moses and his lifestyle, right? But you have to admit that brother had a lot of stress. So how would you explain, the stress that he was dealing with those children those children in Israel and his diet and walking? I mean, can we really walk away our stress?
You absolutely can walk away some of your stress.
Do we need a rod, or we can just walk?
If you live in a bad neighborhood, take a rod. Dogs be mean in them neighborhoods. And even in most neighborhoods, actually, a dog get loose, you're in trouble. But what I want to say is that Moses' lifestyle was really the lifestyle that we as Adventists should have. It is an anti-inflammatory lifestyle. Remember, Moses commanded the people not to eat the fat of the animal or the blood of the animal. So when they did eat meat, it was what we now today call kosher. They drained all the blood and removed all the fat, which makes the meat not actually very tasty. Because remember, their meat wasn't made to be fat like our meat is today. They actually designed our meat to be fatty because people like to feel the taste of fat in their meat, in the muscle of the meat today. So he wasn't eating animals like we eat. Manna was what he ate. Remember, they wanted the flesh pots of Egypt. They were given manna to eat. He obviously got tons of exercise by default. Drank lots of water because they was always fighting over water.
And sunlight.
And sunlight. And here's the most important thing. No one in the Bible, except for Christ himself, gets the quality time with God Moses gets.
Okay.
Moses spent 40 days fasting atop the mountain and received the commandments of God. Now, that tells you that fasting is important, and it also tells you that time with God is important. Because what is one of the great buffers to stress? A spiritual relationship. Okay. Being able to leave things at the foot of the cross. Jesus says, take my yoke upon me and learn of me, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. That's how you release stress in a storm of stress.
Okay, very good.
I'm gonna say simply, because this is what Eric left out from his own mouth, right? Stress equals demands minus resources. Moses knew where his resources were, where his resources lied. They lied with God, right? And so he was rich in resources and recognized that, which means by default, by the equation, his stress was low. Even though his perceived stress was high from dealing with those knuckleheads, he was able to go back and dig back into the resources.
Amen.
Okay. Now, this question you guys will probably not like too much, but if you had to keep one meat, what would it be? And you have to pick one, both of you.
Sure.
Eric, you first.
Oh, okay.
Mushrooms.
That's not a meat.
Mushrooms, jackfruit, tofu.
You're not answering the question.
Satan, all of those are wonderful meat substitutes. You do not need to eat meat whatsoever.
Correct. And I was going to just say, I was going to eat the meat of a nut. So you do call that like some of the meat that's there. But all joking aside, if I'm looking completely scientific, the only thing that's been, and it's not beneficial, the only thing that would come close would be fish, if I knew that there was a lake or a sea that was not contaminated. I'm not cooking it the way that people in my community have cooked it. I know y'all saints are delivered, but where I come from, you put cornmeal, you salt it up, you deep fry it till it's nice and crispy, and throw other stuff in there. Put hot sauce on it, which has another layer of salt and sodium on it, and then you eat it, right? So that's not healthy. Nor am I eating just a limited amount that's 4 ounces the size of a card stack that's there. So if I'm eating that, perhaps but Eric is absolutely right. There's no way that knowing is half the battle, and we have to know and we have to practice what we're doing and apply it.
And let me say, there are types of fish that have more cholesterol in them than pork.
Yes.
And I have to. Our audience said goat meat. They said goat meat. If you got to eat some meat, you can eat you some goat.
My family's Jamaican too, but the goat meat. The goat meat don't work either, because the goat meat still has.
We took a straw test, and they said if you got to eat some meat, you can go.
It still has carnitine in it.
Yes.
You're still going to females. The blood from the goat still has iron, which is an oxidant.
Yes.
Still gonna get in your blood and oxidize you, cause all kind of
Preach.
problems. The saturated fat is still gonna get in and cause all kind of toxic things, cross the blood-brain barrier and cause inflammation. There is no healthy form of meat. The proof of that is not in me, it is in the scripture. When God allowed man to eat meat after the flood, the life expectancy of man decreased precipitously over the next several generations, probably because it permanently changed the gut microbiome. I never really thought about it until we understood that. It's probably permanently changed the gut microbiome of humans so that it took away our ability to live long.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know,
So
and we have a choice now. We're not living in a time where there's a famine. You know, where what was it, Elijah, when he was there with the prophets and they had to go and get the gourds and everything because they didn't have any other option, and it was detrimental to their soul, and they all got sick and so forth. We're not living where there's no options, and we're living in a famine where folks are eating their kids and so forth, and I have no choice but to choose the goat or the choose the fish. You know, we're living in
This
the
conversation went dark real fast. Okay.
well, I mean, that's
The crazy thing is that's happened all throughout history.
Yes, it has.
Even in the Bible, when Jerusalem was surrounded by, I think it was the Assyrian army, and the prophet and the king was there, and the two women were fighting over which one of them was going to eat their kids. Let me tell you something. Don't eat no flesh. Stick to the plants and the fruits. There you go.
All right, we were just testing y'all. We were kidding. That was just a joke. Okay.
Okay.
So are there any good oils, and what type of oil do you recommend?
I'm gonna let Columbus take this one.
So, you know, I mean, listen, oil is a processed substance. It is 100% fat. It's 125 calories roughly per tablespoon. When tablespoon's a half of an ounce, so 250 calories per ounce. So the reality of it is the fact that in science and literature, the only oil that's been shown to have any benefit was extra virgin olive oil, but that's in comparison of moving away from animal fat, right? And so when you go from eating the saturated fat over to a polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fat, that's where you see a benefit, but it's not in comparison to no oil. And so the preference is that most people are using oil to cook meat, in all honesty. You don't have to use oil to saute your vegetables. You don't have to use oil to make a gravy. You can use vegetable broth and it comes out wonderfully, beautifully, and still rich taste and aroma that's there. And that's what you need. If you're frying meat, you're frying eggs, you can't do that with vegetable broth. I recognize that, right? But you don't want to do that because number one, here's the other thing. You change the chemical structure of that oil. By changing the chemical structure, all of a sudden now, whatever prescribed or described health benefits have just gone away. It's gone up in smoke because you've hit that boiling point that's there. So it becomes important for really thinking about what is the purpose. Use an air fryer for your potatoes. Use the oven for baked potatoes. Do it that way. And let's really try and transform our thought process away from some of this.
Okay. And so the last question, and we'll go ahead and leave this, and then you guys can wrap up. But what do you say to those who think that eating a plant-based diet will make you skinny?
What do I say to those who say a plant-based diet can eat you? Well, you know, number one, it's going to depend upon what we call calorie density, right? So if I'm eating what I would call standard American diet, vegan style, standard American diet, plant-based style, that means it's still rich in salt, sugar, and fat. That means that the calories are still high. So Joel Fuhrman, who Eric quoted earlier in terms of his book, Eat to Live, he has an equation too as well to match our equations. And he says, the healthful nature of food equals its nutrition divided by its calories. The higher the nutrition, the lower the calories, the more healthful a food is. If the nutritional value is poor and the calories are high, it's not a very healthy food. And so that goes also towards plant-based food. So there is something called the calorie density scale. And we know that's on the calorie density scale, the highest nutrient value with the lowest calories are going to be your green leafy vegetables. Then you're going to look at your beans and your berries and fruits. Some of the most calorie dense foods are like oil. Your oil and your fats and things of that nature, and the sweets are. So yes, you can lose weight on the whole food plant-based diet, a whole food unrefined plant-based diet, and you'll lose weight quickly.
Okay, great, fantastic. Thank you all.
All right. Well, listen, we hope that this has been a blessing to you all. I do encourage you. As we're on this mission, our mission isn't just for fun or just to beat folks up over food. And the reality of it is we want to meet you where you're at. But our job is to deliver this information out to the masses, deliver this information uniquely to people who look like us and to everyone. It's a message for everyone. And so I do encourage you to follow us at slavefood.org. As Eric mentioned, subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook. So in that way, the message can get out as folks see your likes and they follow you, and they will subsequently have a chance to hear the message. We thank you.
Thank you, guys. Good night.
Good night.